Good morning, everybody. I'm Prabhu Chawla. I work for New Indian Express newspaper in India, which is a southern-based paper. It has 22 editions. And my friend Shashi belongs to one part of South India, Kerala, though he's a global citizen, but I call him still a Malayali because he wins an election from there. This is an interesting topic. It's quite fascinating that we have been trying to engage ourselves. Fostering global citizen. It's a conference on education. So I presume that you're talking about education which produces global citizen. It's a contradiction there, but I will talk about the contradiction there because I leave it to the speakers to talk about the contradictions. It's quite a romantic subject that education should be such a science which makes everybody a global citizen. It is a Greek word in a way. When somebody said cosmopolitan, it was a Greek word because everybody must forget its own culture, must merge with the rest of the cultures. So we are thinking of an education system which will produce global citizens. It means the question which are being raised now today is our education system in various parts of the world, from America to India, is it capable of producing a global citizen? Does it mean that we should forget our cultures? Does it mean for economic sake we could forget our various things and start respecting culture of various other countries, start respecting the traditions of various other countries? What is that global citizenship you're talking about? Because every citizen had a responsibility. When you talk about citizen, the term itself defines a geographical boundary. Because without a geographical boundary, there cannot be a citizen. Since we are talking about a citizen which has no global boundary, that means we have to forget all the geographical boundaries, whether it is between Iran and America, which is far away, of course, which is divided by seas. We should forget about physical boundaries between Pakistan and India, South Korea and North Korea, Japan and China. Yes, it is possible. Yes, we must have education system. So we are talking about a global citizen who talks the same language, respects each other's point of view, respects each other's religion, respects each other's cultures, traditions, and allows freedom of expression. That is what I think is you're talking about. But my honorable panelists will all speak about that. But I would be a little contrarian because when you talk about global citizen, I have to moderate it. And being a moderator is not my virtue. I've been an extremist in back home. Extremist is not the kind people talk about, but I'm extremist in terms of, okay, you take a stand this way or that way. You can't be moderate, because moderate itself means that you have to be this way, that way, okay, this is right, that is right. So coming back to global citizen, I would like to say whether it's possible to accept China leading America. If Chinese person is good, can he lead America? No. If the Indian is good, can he rule over Britain? No. Even if he's a good citizen, if he's a global citizen, we send about 100,000 students all over the world for teaching. Because without Indian students, most of the universities in America would go bankrupt, that I know. But question is, they are producing good students. Are they producing good global citizens? There can be a question which I would like to raise. Is global citizen a utopian concept, elitist contest, because people who study the same system, those who go to Wharton, they go to Oxford, they come back and they want a similar system all over the world. The global citizen concept has been developed by those who are like, we call them PL Jews, people like us. Okay, I'm in Wharton, so I must go back to, say, somewhere in Malaysia or somewhere in Rwanda and find the same system. So are you looking for a club of global citizens who eat the same way, who drink the same way, who talk the same way? Are those global citizens you are trying to produce through the education systems? So you mean to say every capital of the world should have a Wharton, every capital small city of the world should have Oxford, but not a university from China or from India? So you are talking about, are you talking about global citizens so that they can run the countries in the same fashion? Are you talking about nationalism versus global citizenship? Can you bring America and China together? can you bring India and Pakistan together? Why are you fighting for? Because we are same. So obviously there is something which cannot produce a global citizen. Is it possible to reduce those geographical boundaries, mindset, and say, okay, yes, this is the way that we can produce a global citizen who thinks in terms of respect for all. I have got eminent panelists in this session there. We have got with us Mr. Arlindo, who is the Deputy Minister of Education of Mozambique. We have got Shashi, Tharoor, who knows everybody. He is one of the best, brilliant students India has produced. He is from St. Stephen College, and he was a global citizen because he has worked for United Nations. He was India's ambassador, though he used to call himself global citizen, but we still call him Indian. Then we have got Hans, Director General of UNESCO, and they have worked on various issues. I think I'll ask Hans first, because he represents the United Nations. Is there a possibility, what do you mean by global citizens, and how education can produce a global citizen?
Well, thank you very much, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I think it's a key issue, and when you were introducing it, I was reminded that actually we are now in the second round of this global citizenship discussion. The points which you made, why the skepticism about global citizenship, this is why it died away 10 years ago. People saying, oh, what do you do with our borders? We have our cultural identity. Do you want to take it away? What do we do with our history? And now we are in a rebound, so to speak. We are in a new era where we are talking about, how should I say, maybe a better introduced global citizenship approach. I want to make 3 points on that. I think the global citizenship is the concomitant factor of globalization. We cannot have globalization without looking at the people who make globalization work and tick and advance. I think there has to be an understanding among people, whether you're in India, in Pakistan, in China, or in the US, or in Europe, or in Dubai. There has to be an understanding, how do you get together in order to make globalization work? That's point one. Point two is, if you listened to Farid Zakaria yesterday, he said, in a sense also, global citizenship is necessary for interlinking the economies, but also the corporations. How do you make globalized corporations, we call them the multinationals or the transnationals, how do you make them work unless you have in the boardroom people who understand each other? So there is a global citizenship requirement in order to have our brave new world work and function. Thirdly, on the positive and negative aspects, we are in a world of migration. People migrate for different reasons, for poverty, for environmental reasons, but also in order for prosperity aspirations. So if we have people migrate that way, they must settle in different environments, they must settle in different cultures, and they have to have certain skills to perform and to live in these cultures. Again, global citizenship is key. And altogether, I think, and this is where the UNESCO part comes in, by our constitution we have said, since wars emanate from the minds of men and women, it is in the minds of men and women that the defenses for peace have to be built. If we want to maintain peace, there has to be an understanding, and this is now then going to the core of what global citizenship and global citizenship education is, because we're here at the Education Summit. We want to, you spoke about diversity. We have to have pupils and citizens who are respectful of diversity. We have to have citizens who have mutual understanding. How do they get this mutual understanding? If they know history, if they know faith, if they know the cultural practices of other peoples, in order to live together. Learning to live together is another of the famous mottos of education in a globalized world. Now, there are various ways how you can do that, and I just want to finish with some thoughts on that. Clearly, curricula is an eminent point. I'm always saying I live now in France, and when you look, for example, at the French curricula, it is very French. You know, there's not very much global curricula. German curricula, where I'm from, Germany, is also very German in a sense. American curricula, Shashi's kids were at the UN school in New York, where my son was also. And there we learned when they talked history, they only talked American history. I rarely interfered with school, but at one point I went to the principal and say, hey, you're in the UN International School, don't you talk a little bit more than just American history and George Washington? So this gives you the indication what global citizenship is. You must understand, and you can only understand how the other one ticks if you make an effort to learn where they are coming from. And if you know where they're coming from, you know also where they're going to and how you can go together with them. So thank you.
Well said. I think you made a good point. I just remind you an incident which I said because you spoke about a friend. Because when I'm talking about global citizens, you obviously spoke about we should have people in the boardrooms which think alike.
Yes,
you're talking about
absolutely.
the boardroom, not the village room.
No,
so boardroom people can be global citizens, which they are anyway. But I will remind you of one question, because between French and English, I wrote an editorial recently, one of the newspaper, one of my editions, about what is the difference between France and England. I said French is technologically superior than England. I was UK High Commissioner walking into my room, saying, how dare you write that? So I don't know who is global citizen in that way, because he thought I'm better than the French. And both are well educated, I presume so.
If I can say, at the corporate level, I mean, the first problem of global citizenship was to accept women in the boardroom. But you know that there are studies that in American multinationals, there are very few non-Americans. In European multinationals, there are very few non-Europeans. And in Mittal's boardrooms, possibly, there are very few non-Indians. So there's still a bias. There's not a glass ceiling, but a very deliberate control ceiling in there, which is an obstacle to better understanding. And I think possibly corporations would do much better if they had a much more open-minded operation. But generally, it goes from the village school up to the boardroom at all levels, in my understanding.
Anyway, my understanding of global citizenship is that you forget your own identity and merge into a global kind of a scenario. Anyway, I'll ask Mr. Arlindo what do you think, because when you talk about global citizen, how do you define global citizen in terms of, because if education has to produce a global citizen.
Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I wish I could speak on my native language, Chichopi. I can't even speak in Portuguese here, but I must speak in English. Which is a language that I had to learn just to be globalized. In fact, sometimes when we talk about globalization and talking about global citizenship, we look at from the consumption point, and we look at what all of us who consume, you know, Nikes, Coca-Cola, Pepsi-Cola, Levi's, etc., etc. But in fact, I inspired myself on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights just to prepare some notes for this talk. The Article 2 says, let me just cite the quote, everyone is entitled to all the rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration without distinction of any kind, such as race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status. Furthermore, no distinction shall be made on the basis of the political, jurisdictional, or international status, or of the country or territory to which a person belongs, whether it be independent, trust, non-self-governing, or any other limitation of sovereignty. Based on this very important, article, I just inspired myself, and I have chosen a set of values that are important to enhance global citizenship. And I have selected one, tolerance and acceptance of differences, like, for example, race, religion, ethnicity, or nationality or sexuality. And the second one is the willingness to live and promote peace. And the third is the willingness to respect and protect the environment. And I will wrap up with the role of education, just touch a little bit the issue of curriculum. The first one, tolerance and acceptance of differences. In fact, in the world, there are many and diverse peoples, diverse cultures, religions that make our world a very, beautiful rainbow, which enriches also the humanity. Each ethnic group produce local or what we can call indigenous knowledge, which makes the national citizenship richer and also the global citizenship still richer and more interesting. Thanks to this local or indigenous knowledge, local traditions and cultures of each of our peoples come into global intellectual stage as an agent that is both the subject and object of knowledge. Thanks to this local knowledge and culture, each people plays simultaneously an active and passive roles. Each people has something to share and to learn from others. There is not such a thing as superior or inferior cultures. Thus, the dialect intercourse of these differences make us more tolerant, more willing to share the world we live in peacefully. So this will take us to the second value, the willingness to live and promote peace. So tolerance leads inevitably to peace. When we tolerate the difference, we don't fight against what is different. When we respect the freedom of speech, when we accept that we can still share the same county, municipality, the same country, and the same world, in spite of our differences, we are teaching our children that democracy. We are teaching our children that we can live in peace. We are promoting peace. This is a global value that must be celebrated. The third one, quickly, the willingness to respect and protect the environment. I understand this as another very important value that must be celebrated in each household, village, county, municipality, country, and across our national borders. When we clear forests, for example, in Amazon, in Congo, Mozambique, of course, they will affect all of us. When we release carbon dioxide, when we pollute waters in our communities, the impact is global. We must, therefore, teach our children to respect and protect the environment. So here comes the role of education. We think that our curriculum, the content of what we teach in our schools, regardless of the location, be it in a developed or post-industrial nation, or in a developing country, still struggling to feed themselves, we must include these universal, these global values, this cosmopolitan set of values, and which, citing, for example, Tasso, Lagos, we call, that must be shared by cosmopolitan community of individuals. Education is the key element for the development, enhancing dissemination, and sharing and appropriation of these universal cosmopolitan values. We must look at the curriculum from basic education all the way through the college or university. If it neglects or does not address these values, like democracy, world peace, leadership, justice, diversity, equality, and harmony, then we are failing to build the global citizenship. In terms of partnership, I think we can find partnership amongst all the stakeholders, like governments, NGOs, religious organizations, private business, education providers, the multinationals, and those that bear a lot of responsibility because they go into national boundaries and they fetch resources, national resources there, and also human resources for the sake of their profits. I think they should contribute more for the values that can be shared globally in our education. And this is also an instrument that we can use in all this globalization, and it's that the ICTs, and this is a good partner, that can, through which we can foster all the values of global citizenship. Thank you very much.
I think you have well defined what is to be done through the education to promote global citizenship. Because all the schools do that, in fact, peace, tolerance. In fact, in India, we talk about unity in diversity, because India is the most diverse country in the world. We have got so many languages, so many civilizations, cultural still. India is the only country which is united. Many European countries are broken, Western countries are broken, and we still remain united because we have some kind of a cultural identity. But the question arises that Shashi has been dealing with, he has been almost running United Nations. He must have visited over 200 countries, and he must be knowing the culture of each one of them. Shashi, what do you think that is it possible to promote global citizenship? First, I would like you to define what do you mean by global citizenship, because I think it's a corporate jargon. It is not a social or a political jargon, because people, he spoke about his board meeting, because if the American MNCs want to come to India, they want the visa on landing. But when Indian businessman wants to go there, he has to go putting his shoes off the rack, and then he can go there. And you want to come to India, because this is happening all over the world, because some people want to dictate their global citizenship and their terms. And our education system in Kerala, where you come from, because 30% of the people are not educated even. So in a global atmosphere where immigration laws are becoming stricter and stricter day by day, biometric things are happening, your nose, your eyes, and everything is in the computer now. You are talking about global citizen. You are dividing because of the color, because of the eyes, because of the hair, because of everything else, how you produce global citizen. Why can't you break boundaries that, okay, if Indians wants to go to America, they can come in 100,000 without being checked. Or American wants to come India, they are most welcome. So global citizen means only when there are no immigration laws. WTO, you have been fighting there. When it comes to labor, everybody gets together. So how do you produce good education, even if you produce good education, but will you be able to make them global citizen? Okay, all passports abolished. I'm talking about a very impractical solution that will you have a global atmosphere in which nobody will have any passport?
Thank you, Prabhu. We're listening to all three of you this afternoon. I must say that this morning, I suppose, it still is in Dubai. I found myself agreeing with bits of each of you. So that's my first dilemma. You posited the very important issue in your very first remarks about the contradiction between the notion of identity, which is essentially a national one as you saw it, and the notion of global citizenship, which you felt would involve a loss of identity. Hans talked about the need for an education that would equip us to cope with this increasingly globalizing world, which is, after all, a globalization, as he says, of people as well. And then our friend from Mozambique talked about the qualities that make a global citizen, and in particular stressed the importance of education creating a cosmopolitan community. And all of these three propositions I tend to agree with, and yet I have a slightly different take on where we all go on this. First of all, I agree with Prabhu there is a contradiction, but I'm not sure it's quite the contradiction that he mentions. Part of the contradiction is, and I speak very much from the perspective of a developing country, like my friend from Mozambique, which is that one of the principal purposes of education in most developing countries has actually been the building up of a citizenship, a national consciousness, which did not previously exist or had not been consciously inculcated, particularly in formerly colonized countries, as ours was and as theirs was. We've had a sort of sense of national self-definition that had been lost and that has needed to be reasserted. And so the first challenge in many educational systems has been to create and inculcate a certain pride in national identity, in a knowledge of national history, in a sense of national citizenship, transcending whatever differences may exist within those societies. So the challenge then becomes between the overwhelming task of citizenship building, of citizen creating in a sense, and of these, as you suggest, Prabhu, somewhat more amorphous global values that we seem to be celebrating. Now, having said that, it's not purely a problem of developing countries, though it is so in recent years, because if you go back to the 19th century, you've seen similar debates in other countries. When Italy was created out of a mosaic of principalities and statelets in the second half of the 19th century, a famous Italian writer, Massimo Tapparelli d'Azeglio, wrote, "Now we have created Italy, now all we need to do is to create Italians." So the very notion that the idea of Italy did not exist in the minds of Neapolitans and Venetians and Romans, and that had to be created, it was done through the education system. In France, Ernst Renan delivered a very famous speech in the early 1880s, in which he talked about how important it was for the education system to inculcate a sense of Frenchness, as it were, in the French people, and that one of the crucial elements, he argued, had to be forgetting. That if people in the Midi remembered the extraordinary horrors of the massacres that accompanied the unification of France in the Middle Ages, and that was constantly taught to them and reminded them there'd never be a united France. So the importance of forgetting in creating the idea of a nation. And indeed, the French took it to an extreme, as Hans points out, since he lives there now. The French have a very strong sense of inculcating national attitudes, irrespective of things like religion, ethnicity, and so on. So even when the French had colonies around the world, and there were people who were black and brown and so on, they all read out texts beginning with the words, "Nos ancêtres les Gaulois," our ancestors, the Gauls. Now that was something that apparently colonized black people and brown people and so on all shared with the white people of France, was our "Nos ancêtres les Gaulois." So that is the very conscious attempt made by other societies in the not so distant past to create a sense of citizenship in their own peoples and a sense of national identity before they have acquired the cosmopolitanism of the late 20th and early 21st centuries. So it is a universal dilemma, which perhaps, for example, our European friends have outgrown. They've already merged many of their national identities into European Union, but certainly the rest of us are yet to outgrow. The second aspect, of course, is that what goes into the education curriculum when you're teaching good citizenship. If your textbooks are telling the children that theirs is the best country in the world, or that theirs is the only true religion in the world, and that all others must be disdained or rejected or even fought against, then clearly that is not a prescription for global citizenship. That may create people with a fierce certain local, national or religious pride, but it does not give you people who are able to interact meaningfully with people of other cultures, other nationalities, and other religions. Which is why the combination of points that Hans, and tell me your name again, Mr. Arlindo, made are so important, because they both identified, it seems to me, Hans, why we need education to prepare one for participation in a globalizing world, and Arlindo specified some of the elements, particularly the element of tolerance, promotion of peace, which I thought were extremely necessary, because in a sense one needs to define global citizenship, Prabhu's last challenge to me, in a way that it doesn't go quite as far as Prabhu does. If Prabhu interprets the word citizenship literally to mean a common passport, no visas, no immigration requirements, that ain't happening, buddy. And that isn't going to happen to, and frankly, we are no different from the Americans. I mean, you think we are very happy with giving visas to anybody who wants to come in? I mean, in fact, if we had had visas back in the 1700s, we mightn't have had 200 years of British rule. so the days when people freely let people through their borders, or didn't have the capacity to control their borders, those are not days that any sovereign nation today wishes to reinvent. And so countries around the world are indeed still preserving as a vital attribute of nationalism, of sovereignty, of independence, the right to decide who can come into their countries and on what terms and what conditions. And that is something that is universal. It is not something we can only blame the Americans for, Prabhu, as you did. I think we are no different. I mean, talk to Pakistanis about how easy it is to get an Indian visa, for example, or even Americans of Pakistani origin, see how easy it is for them to get an Indian visa. So the fact is that there are challenges for every country in controlling their borders, and national security considerations always trump it. I agree, however, it is one of the anomalies of globalization. You can move billions of dollars with one pulse of a cursor on a screen, but you can't move a single person without going through weeks of visa applications and interviews and so on, and other headaches. So that is still one of the remaining anomalies of the world. But despite that, 5% of the world's population today lives in countries other than those in which they were born. 5%. So there has been a significant amount of migration. And when Prabhu rhetorically asked in his opening remarks, can an Indian rule America? Well, there are a couple of Indians ruling a couple of American states. Both South Carolina and Louisiana have governors who are of Indian descent. And that is already a sign that citizenship in that particular instance has trumped ethnicity as a reference point in determining what makes an eligible candidate. But let me then be an Indian minister for a minute and come back to the Indian example. Because for me, the thing that gives me the most satisfaction, and Prabhu knows my writings over the years, I have advocated a certain notion of Indianness for over 20 years in my columns and books, which I believe actually is completely compatible with the notion of global citizenship as Hans and Arlindo and I have defined it, not as Prabhu has defined it, which is an education in values that equip you to live in an increasingly interconnected world. A world in which indeed you can be in touch now with people, half a world where you've never seen, through the internet, through email, where you can watch on your television screens images from half a globe away because of satellite television and so on, where you have a familiarity with the rest of the planet that was not available to Prabhu's or my generation or Hans's when we were in our 20s. This was simply not available, or in our 30s. Today, there is a consciousness now of the rest of the world that has come along with the increasing globalization of the economy. Arlindo mentioned Nike and Starbucks and McDonald's and so on. That's one aspect of it. As an Indian, I could even argue that Bollywood is now spreading its influence around the world. I keep meeting Africans and Arabs who seem to be watching a lot of Bollywood movies. So you have these cultural tropes that are no longer confined to any one country. You also have economies that are deeply intertwined. Friedman's famous "the world is flat" thesis. More and more products are coming to your desk or your table or your bedroom that have been made in 7 different countries and assembled in an 8th. And that too is part of the way in which you work. So that in today's global economy, more and more people are having to react and relate to each other. They're going to have to deal with people who don't look like them, talk like them, worship like them, eat like them, dress like them. And that is, the ability to do that is what I would define as global citizenship. And there, India, to my mind, is in a very good place because our own national identity is predicated on an acceptance of differences and on a celebration of diversity. Because we ourselves are a land of so many differences, of caste, of creed, of color, of culture, of cuisine, of conviction, of consonant, of costume and custom. We can have a consensus around a notion that Indianness embraces this wide variety, that you have to have a sense of the person sitting next to you may worship a different God, eat a different kind of food at home, speak a different language, have a different color of skin, but he's still your fellow citizen or she's still your fellow citizen, and you are sleeping under the same sky and dreaming the same dreams. That is the strength of the Indian experience, and therefore I'm able to get past Prabhu's contradiction by seeing, with that notion of Indianness, I see no contradiction between creating a better Indian through our educational system and creating a better global citizen, which may be why so many Indians have done so well abroad. And I've often argued that the only place where Indians don't do so well may be in India, because they're so well prepared by having grown up in India to flourish abroad that they go out and do extremely well, and they turn out to be rather good global citizens. Let me also mention 3 elements in the education curricula that could help in this. One is certainly to encourage curiosity about the world. Excessively nationalist or localitis-focused curricula will hamper the young person who has to interact with foreigners. Let us create more world history textbooks, more world geography awareness, and more consciousness that there are other ways of eating, of dressing, of worshipping, and so on. Second, the encouragement of the study of languages. Most Indians are actually multilingual. Within India, our languages are so different from each other, and usually very few Indians, except perhaps a farmer in in a remote village in the Hindi heartland can get by only knowing one language. So, for example, as somebody from Kerala, it was quite common to hear smatterings of Tamil, of Hindi, and of English, and certainly a widespread experience across Kerala, and similarly in other parts of India. And the third point is one that Arlindo has already made, the importance of inculcation of tolerance. That what we are not asking anyone to disown their own identity, as Prabhu fears, but to accept that you can be secure in your own identity just as he or she can be secure in their identity. And that your identity has nothing to fear from theirs, and theirs has nothing to fear from yours if you accept and respect each other's differences and learn to coexist. I don't think anybody, any baby in this world is born intolerant. Intolerance is inculcated through various cultural influences, including the education system. And if we therefore have in our education system a conscious encouragement of tolerance, it seems to me we would head off in the right direction. We began the last century with the famous slogan that it was necessary to make the world safe for democracy. I think in this century now, it is time for us to use education to make the world safe for diversity. Thank you very much.
I think that was global experience speaking, and he has the experience of talking to everybody, so he could put it together. The question is that he spoke about various things like talking about good citizenship. That is a new concept he brought in. From a global citizenship to good citizenship, it means global citizen cannot be good all the time. And he talked about national identity, individual identity. And one thing he made very clear that all of us must not forget that we are sleeping under the same sky. Even the nature is against global citizenship, because when you're sleeping into the same sky, some people are not sleeping in the sky up because there's noon somewhere, there's a darkness somewhere else. So when Indians are sleeping, the Americans are awake. When Americans are awake, so it means there is some kind of a geographical, natural things which divide various nationalities. It is because of that you cannot have a global citizenship. But again, coming back to you, because education, we're talking about education. If education you're talking about to produce global citizens, are you talking as a business concept or a mission? Because I get the feeling that all of you are talking about a business concept, that countries, the business is becoming globalized, but the countries are becoming localized. They are making more and more restrictive practices to allow people to come in. Because the distinction between moving mobile, upwardly mobile business classes who want to move all over the world without a passport, but prevent others from going there. Other problem is that you can produce a global citizen only if you have got equitable access to quality education all over the world. That is what the basic factor is. UNESCO as a fact must talk about, because some people are getting quality education, and therefore they are producing people who want global citizenship. Some people are being denied even basic education. They don't want global citizenship. They want to be nationalist. Is there a dilemma in that? I'm raising the question.
Well, luckily, dear Mr. Moderator, we have not enough nationalists, because otherwise we would have possibly many more conflicts, because nationalism is, of course, a recipe for conflict and for not peaceful behavior. But I think you are not entirely correct in your perception. Look at Europe. We are moving in Europe towards an integration. Schengen is a bad word for outsiders of Europe, but it's a good word for inside Europe, Europeans. You know, you can zoom through the frontiers. There's no more passport or other control, which gives you a different feeling of life quality. You go to the ASEAN countries, also an area which was not historically entirely peaceful. The ASEANs are moving together, and the Africans. I mean, you started with ECOWAS in West Africa, where they basically took away the visas. You could travel in SADC, in Southern Africa. I think you have the same. So there are moves towards a more open engagement of countries with a very strong identity, but nevertheless ready to live. There's one point I wanted to say. Curricula is only one point. Curricula sometimes are good. Teachers will be very key in the way how are they educating children to digest that, what is in the curricula. But also we have to see in the educational system, possibly at the secondary level, how can we inculcate the practice of that. And we, for example, at UNESCO, we used to have very interesting experiences. We called it Mondialogo, public-private partnership. It was paid by Daimler Chrysler in those days, and we brought school classes together, and we paired them in a sense, on a lottery basis, so that an Indian school was working with a South African school, and an American school, believe it or not, was working with an Iranian school. And their task was to get to know each other, to teach each other's history, to teach each other's practices, their foods, whatever they would like to do in their off time. And then to work together in a second phase on a joint project in order to see what is the positive impact of dialogue. It worked fantastically. It was killed when the automobile industry went down and Daimler, without Chrysler then, felt it couldn't invest the money anymore. But the kids, they're still together today. We get still, after 3-4 years, still we get letters to say this was the best thing which ever happened. And really, the practice of getting together is so important. We have a second point, which is more stable. It is the Associated Schools Network, and I'm glad that we have some members here also among the GEMS schools, which provides you global curricula. For example, heritage in young hands. You have to understand what is heritage. How does it provide your identity? How does it contribute to diversity? We have the same thing for education for sustainable development. What the Deputy Minister said, environment being one of the key values, the preservation of the environment. How can we do that? As long as we can find common themes around which we can rally every generation, not only the kids, but up to lifelong learning approaches, I think we are moving towards a global citizenship, without which we could not manage this globe. We cannot manage this globe on a separatist agenda. We have to manage it on a diversified, respectful agenda altogether.
Good. I think I'll throw the session open to questions from the audiences. I think women must have the first right.
Across the UAE, they say there are 180 different nationalities. Thank you. The UAE is a country that is focused on welcoming the world whilst protecting its own national identity, at the same time showing respect and tolerance for other nationalities. What can we learn from them?
Well, I think the lesson of the UAE is simply one of leadership. Political leadership has to give you the space to do precisely that, to bring different nationalities together at school level, but also in the business level. And there's no surprise that Dubai, I remember a couple of years when I came here saying, you know Singapore, you ain't seen nothing yet. You will get 7 times Singapore in Dubai. This gives you the spirit. You want to be open. You want to integrate people of different identities, of different cultures, and see how they can live together. And I think the peaceful experience of Dubai attests that such a model works and can work.
It's a delight to have you with us, and I'm one of your 7 million followers on Twitter. So, India in the global arena ranked second last in the PISA ratings out of the 73 countries. And that's in stark contrast to the statistics which reveal 25,000 of the 100,000 graduates from Indian Institute of Technologies who get recruited into the US IT giants year on year. And again, if you look at the UAE, like what Margaret said, we have 1.75 million Indians, which constitutes 30% of the UAE population. And so if the Indian curriculum and pedagogical practices, as per the PISA ratings, do not really indicate that it produces globally competent, skilled workforce, and yet we have this large expat Indian population doing pretty well outside of India. So what then is the driver to equip people with global competency? Isn't it more the need of one entity and the demand of another? Your comments?
Well, first of all, I want to start off by stressing that you're right, we have a long way to go, that there are problems, that we have real challenges of achievement, which I will address briefly in my plenary remarks after this panel, after this round table. But at the same time, the PISA findings also point to the extreme difficulty of any reasonable analysis of Indian education. They took 5 schools in Haryana, I think, and 5 schools in Tamil Nadu, and from that they came to their conclusions. If they'd taken 5 schools in Bombay and 5 schools in Delhi, they might have had totally different numbers. The country is too vast, and the unevenness of our education system is so great that the mere selection of which students you're examining will give you totally different results. India is this land of contradictions. We have some of the brightest and most successful students in the world. In fact, to this day, it remains true. But when I was a graduate student back in the 1970s in America, I discovered that every single IIT graduate, without exception, would get a full scholarship to pursue graduate study in America. A full scholarship. If you came first in the class, you'd probably get that scholarship from MIT or Caltech. If you came at the bottom of your IIT graduating class, you'd get a full scholarship from Syracuse or Rensselaer Polytechnic or the University of Oklahoma. But you'd get something because just getting into the IIT showed that you were already better than the average applicant to any American university. That was the kind of perception. So clearly the school system had to be doing something right to get these people to that level of competence. The answer really lies in the unevenness of the system. We have lots and lots of excellent schools and a far greater number of mediocre or even bad schools. The same applies to teachers. We have some outstanding teachers, some very bad ones, some who don't show up to teach or show up and sign, collect their money and disappear. And you've got all of these phenomena. So the answer lies not in being guided by a particular test, because I said in a country the size of India, 1.2 billion people, I'm afraid you really can't meaningfully choose a random sample of that size and draw conclusions for the whole country from that. What you need to do essentially is, it seems to me, to raise the level and quality of education throughout the country. And these we're trying to do. So for example, we're trying to improve the quality of teaching, increasing teacher salaries on the one hand, improving teacher training on the other, including in-service training and refresher training, and then requiring everyone teaching in India to have passed a teacher eligibility test, so we can weed out the less competent teachers who sadly still infest our system. This is something which, so you get rid of the not so good ones, and you make it more attractive for better people to come into the system. And we're trying to do that. And similarly, as far as schooling is concerned, our national curriculum framework is widely admired around the world. It came up in 2005, very highly respected. One of my first acts as minister was to chair a meeting of what's called the E9, the 9 largest developing countries, education ministers of the 9 largest developing countries in the world. And they were all extremely interested in our national curriculum framework, impressed with the philosophy and the content, wanted to adapt it to their own countries. And this is a healthy sign that we're doing certain things right in the pedagogical arena. Third, we're also trying to improve the overall quality of the school system and the retention of students in it. In the government schools, that can be something as basic as midday meals, as an incentive for people to remain. It can be as basic as constructing toilets for girls. Girls don't drop out past a certain age when there are no facilities for them to change, otherwise they'll go home and they won't come back. And these things have been happening as well. So all of these, I mean, our interventions as a government are going beyond the literal, strict educational aspect into things that support the education infrastructure. And we're doing all of this. My only hope is that in a few years' time, the impact of this will become more and more apparent.
I'd like to build on the earlier question and ask Mr. Tharoor, what in your opinion is the UAE doing right in terms of fostering global citizenship, and what can other countries or India learn from them?
The sad truth is I have absolutely no idea what the UAE is doing because I don't know the UAE educational system. So I'm not the right person to answer it. All I can see is that the example of daily life in the UAE is not one that promotes intolerance, because you're living all the time amongst people of different nationalities, languages, habits, dress, and so on. And therefore, it seems to me there is a presumption in the society that encourages this tolerance. But beyond that, I don't know what the education system does. I don't know what their textbooks say. And it would be rash of me to pass judgment on another country's education policy. I don't know if you would disagree with that.
Yes, I have given already 3 questions to women. Let me go to the men now at least. Yeah, please.
Sir, as you rightly said that yes, Indians are doing very well. They've been doing very well in the past, so they are doing very well even now. My worry only is this, that despite of Indians doing so well all over the world, why does India allow a PISA rating to affect the Indian standards all over? Why does India allow the PISA people to come in and take the test like that, go on and reflect us in poor light? Why does the teacher's eligibility test show a 1% passing? Why doesn't the government take action on these numbers? I mean, when we sit globally, we are shown in poor light because of the statistics that comes out of our country. Why can't the statistics which comes out be checked by the country and then these numbers taken care of? Why should we be shown in poor light when we are doing so well? So there's a plea from my side that please, you must look into this very effectively as a government and see that we, whatever we are shown to the world in the correct perspective. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, on the PISA thing, as I said, there's certainly only two ways we can respond to that. Either have some influence on how they choose their sample of schools to test, so that we have the range of schools and not just perhaps some of the underperforming ones. Or some people have advocated that we don't invite them back into the country and that we just manage to develop our own assessments. I don't know in the end which way we'll go, but your point is understood and well noted. On the other aspects of your issue, I mean, the fact is we do have challenges to overcome. We are conscious of history and perspective, outsiders are not. The British left us with a literacy rate of 16%. Okay, in the census of 1951, there were 17% people literate. Only 8.5% women in the entire country could read and write after 200 years of British rule. So the fact that we've spent 65 years taking that up to 74% is actually not that bad. Of course, it could be vastly better. We'd love to be near 100%, but you're talking about 1.2 billion people now. So the challenge and the scale of the challenge is enormous. I think there is a tendency to underappreciate how much India has done on this. I'm going to talk a little bit about this in the plenary, so let me not repeat myself, and I'm sure others have questions too.
Hello, Mr. Tharoor. I have a question. I'm a student from Jumeirah College, a GEM school, and my question is on the lack of reform that has happened in the national Indian curriculum. As you mentioned earlier, it's widely regarded for its academic rigor, for its toughness, shall I say, and the academic standards it produces. But I think something that has been underestimated or overlooked widely is that the need for a holistic curriculum, that the lack of world history, world geography in the Indian curriculum. I see many of my relatives and friends who do go to schools that follow the national curriculum, and I really see that this lack of knowing what goes around the world and what's in the state. And I think what that leads to, that principle in that system, really, it allows these old values to be entrenched. And when I do go to India, I see that there's not this culture of tolerance. People stay with their own, the principles of the households they're from, the religions they're from, the caste they're from, and that lack of open-mindedness, that lack of people being open-minded really comes from the entrenched principles of the system. So my question is, when can we see some real reform, fundamental reform within the system to improve this problem? Thank you.
Well, what you're asking, I'm afraid, is going to be difficult for India to do for the simple reason that we're a federal system. The National Curriculum Framework is indeed followed by the CBSE, the Central Board of Secondary Education. And those schools across the country that are affiliated to it do have all of this, including world history and world geography and so on. But in our federal system, the states have the right to either follow these or not follow these, and many don't. In fact, the majority don't. So they have their own state boards and their own state curricula and their own state textbooks, many of which, as you say, don't have any of these things, and then also, frankly, have a lot of things we'd rather not see in there, including some fairly dumb points that once in a while the media finds out and ridicules. So in terms of our educational system in India, we will always have this diversity. There are a multiplicity of boards in our country and different examinations that people can take and different standards and curricula, and as long as we are a federal nation, we may have no way out of that. I don't know if Hans wants to respond from another angle.
I just wanted to say one thing to the gentleman who spoke before. Don't you worry. Germany, I think, was number 15 under the OECD PISA. So, you don't have to be always number one on that.
Time is getting over. I'll ask last 2, 3 questions. That's all.
My name is Atul. I'm from Singapore, so I heard some comments about Singapore. I think the answer lies to Mr. Chawla's question, is who is a global citizen? And if you look at the signboard behind all of you, it actually says meeting challenges together. all the regulators, all the countries today, the whole thing is driven by customers. And I think the theory is that we are all serving customers of different kinds. And because of that, there are businesses who are having an overlap of various systems or various markets, and these are leading to people having the ability to understand, to be able to go to any country. You may not be born there, so you don't have to look like one, you don't have to smell like one or eat like one, but you are basically required to go into any territory by virtue of your customers' requirements and be able to perform there and meet the challenges of that country. Only then will you have the ability to capitalize on those opportunities. So basically the question to Mr. Tharoor is that do you really find talent from any country in general? The national frameworks in the countries that you know of are really preparing people to meet these challenges in the external environment.
Well, I think that what's important is to get away from for any educational system, but certainly in India, I can say this with confidence, to get away from the mindset where you basically fill kids with facts that they need to regurgitate in examinations. The entire mentality of preparing for examinations, which has governed our education system for far too long and many other countries' systems, overlooks the simple fact that in the big examination called life, it has an unpleasant habit of asking you questions you haven't prepared for. And so the answer to your question really is that you need an educational system that prepares people to deal with the unexpected and the unfamiliar. And that instead of producing children with well-filled minds, we produce children with well-formed minds that are able to deal with unexpected issues, unfamiliar countries, new languages, new people, new ways of living and being, and that they in turn have the intellectual capacity to learn those, react to them, and make them work. So that would be the answer. And I think, I certainly felt that my education growing up in India equipped me adequately for it. And I went abroad at the age of 19 and took another 3 decades to come back. So I didn't feel in any way handicapped by my education. I felt strengthened by it. Now, obviously, not everybody has the same education in our country or in any country. And not everyone perhaps takes advantage of it in quite the same way. So I don't want to generalize. But I do believe that that is what we should try and get out of our educational systems. Arlindo hasn't answered anything. You want to respond on this point? It applies to everybody. You happy?
To twist the saying that some are born more equal than others, we have some countries that exist more equal than others. So where does global citizenship stand in that context?
My understanding to this is that we don't have a final product of global citizenship. It's something that we're building, and education is dynamic, and this is the key element just to achieve that global understanding of peoples. So I think what we need to do, indeed, is to look at our curriculum nationally and try to bring in all these elements that will promote this, integration. Because as my colleague here from India said, also in my country, we have got various ethnic groups. The way we're building our nation is just based on these principles. That we share them common values, principles, and we invest on them so that we can understand each other.
Hello. Anyway, hello. I think it was it's over now, let me conclude it. It's a good session. It's over now. It's a good session, but there was no agreement of global citizenship. Only thing, one agreement, we should be all good human beings, tolerate each other very well. And still, because far away, Mr. Sheng, he pointed about Schengen, I will give example, little bit of deviation, because still we are moving in the same direction. But when you go in India to get a Schengen visa, we are told you can go only to the same country from where you got the visa. It means I can't go to any Schengen country. Even within your own Schengen, you have a limitation. Okay, you got it from France, first land in France, not in Italy. So it means there is still a distinction there. But I agree that there is a good mind concept to have a global citizen. Means you must be good citizen, you must be good human being. It is still in the good thinking started. But global citizen will be possible only if there is equitable access to good quality education. Once you ensure that, otherwise it will remain only in the minds of the MNCs and boards of the various corporations. It will not be implemented. Thank you very much, all of you.